dry pack method. You can use a dry pack method, which is really good for small fruits, such as you see on the slide, we have blueberries, and that gives a good quality product without sugar. And simply, you just pack the fruit into a container and seal it and freeze it. A tray pack is an alternative way that you can make the fruit easier to remove from the container. And simply, you just want to spread your fruit out in a single layer of your prepared fruit on, and then put it on shallow trays, put it into the freezer, and just see if you can get it to freeze as quickly as possible. And then you want to take that loose fruit out and put it into a container, or you can use a freezer bag. You just want to make sure that to package the fruit so that it's that it's frozen. You want to prevent that freezer burn. So on the top picture we have rhubarb, and on the bottom picture we have blueberries, and that just shows you how you can use that tray pack method. Really simple to do. Now, other way that you can pack your fruit is you can use a sugar pack. A sugar suppresses the freezing point of water, and that offers protection of the texture. The sugar also, of course, is going to add flavor as well. And it's just one way that you can freeze your fruits. It gives a better texture. You want to make sure that your fruit is completely covered with the syrup. And what we recommend is that you make a simple syrup with 1 cup of sugar, 4 cups of water. Now you see that at the top picture, you have your peaches in that solution. The bottom picture, we have some crumpled freezer paper that you put on top, and then you put the cover onto that container, and that keeps the fruit from floating up to the top and getting out of the solution while it's frozen. So that's what we recommend, because that those peaches are going to float, so you want to make sure that they stay in the solution, and the solution will help keep them plumper and they'll last longer in the freezer. So that's one little trick that you can do. So when it comes to freezing, remember, you want to make sure that you're picking materials that will last in the freezer and keep your foods as as fresh as possible. So there's a difference between a freezer bag and a storage bag. You want to make sure that you're using freezer bags, because they're going to have a thicker plastic, will protect your foods from those really cold temperatures, and they're designed to last in the freezer. Usually we tell people you can keep things in the freezer for about a year for high quality. If you want to keep it longer than that, it's not going to go bad, but it will start to lose its quality. Heavy duty aluminum foil also works really well with freezing foods. You can use vacuum sealed bags, and also you can, like I said before, laminated freezer paper. Just make sure that what you're using is it's designed for freezer use. Do we have any questions so far?
I had a quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Chip. I just have a quick question. On the last slide, that paper, was that like wax paper that was crumpled up, or is it a special kind of paper?
Oh, that's freezer paper.
Oh, the freezer paper. Okay, I never heard of freezer paper. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think this slide, see at the bottom, that's freezer paper. And usually you can find that where you find the aluminum foil and plastic wrap and things like that. Just look for freezer paper. And it has a wax coating on one side, and it's like almost like a parchment on the other.
Awesome, thank you.
And well, that's maple syrup. Will that actually freeze? Do you know what temperature that freezes at?
Wait a second. Maple syrup?
Yeah, that syrup. No, not the maple syrup. The syrup that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, yes, it will freeze. It's a simple. I'm sorry, my when my when my computer moves, this changing the slide. Yeah, the syrup will freeze, but the sugar will help give you a better texture than just freezing it in water alone, because that water is going to freeze really hard. And again, that really hard frozen water will destroy the texture of the peaches. So it really helps if you have a little bit of sugar in there with it.
Gotcha.
It can be frozen without the sugar, but you can also use like an unsweetened juice if you're worried about the sugar content.
I see.
Okay. So we kind of talked about the freezing, the packing materials for freezing. Now let's get into canning. Let's look at some of the basic information about canning. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button here. Okay, so when it comes to canning, canning preserves foods by killing and preventing the growth of undesirable microorganisms. It also, like the enzymes in the fruit, vegetables will have enzymes also. And those, the canning process will inactivate the enzymes. And that's what causes the loss of flavor, color, or nutrients in your foods. It prevents reactions with oxygen because of that vacuum seal that you're going to get in your jar. It prevents moisture loss for the same reason. So canning has a lot of great benefits. So when it comes to canning, some of the critical factors to remember in home canning is that we really want to consider the microorganisms that can cause problems with your canning foods and cause illness. You really want to consider the acidity of the food. That's one of the major factors that's used to determine how you can something. We're going to make sure that we have a heat processing method. There's 3 basic methods that you can use, and we'll talk about those quickly as well. And the seal that you get on your jar is really critical. So let's start by looking at the microorganisms. Now, one of the major, the 2 of the major microorganisms that we are worried about are yeast and molds. They can produce turbidity or a discoloration, a cloudy look in your product, and also can give you a bad flavor. Some molds produce heat-resistant spores, and some molds will actually produce harmful toxins, mycotoxins. Now, the thing about molds is you can see a moldy product if you open up your jar, you see this mold on your peaches or on your jelly or whatever, that's it's gone bad and air has gotten in the jar. So you can, toss it. So if there's anything good about mold, that's one of the things you can see mold as it occurs. Now, when it comes to bacteria, the main one that we are concerned with when it comes to canning food is Clostridium botulinum. Now, Clostridium botulinum is found everywhere in our environment. It's found in soils, and it can be on foods. The main problem with this is that it exists as a heat-resistant dormant spore that can survive in long periods of time, and under the right conditions, they can germinate and become vegetative cells that release a deadly botulinum toxin. So the potential for germination is strongly affected by their environment. And people think, well, I put my green beans or my food into a jar and I cooked it for a long time, so that will kill the botulism. But unfortunately, that's not the case, because using a water bath method for canning vegetables just won't cut it, because the botulism needs temperatures a lot higher than what you can achieve in a boiling water bath to kill it. So we're going to talk about that too. So when it comes to canned foods, they're divided into 2 categories: acid foods and low acid foods. So when it comes to acid foods, they have a pH of 4.6 or lower, and low acid foods have a higher pH. So let's look at some examples of this. So when it comes to low acid foods, vegetables, chicken, potatoes are considered low acid foods. And the tomatoes are kind of right in the middle. They can have a pH of 3.5 to 4.9. So with tomatoes, you can really treat them as a low acid or high acid food, really determining how you process them. So we're going to process our tomatoes tonight in a boiling water bath canner, but there's some tomato recipes that we really recommend that you use a pressure canner, especially if you're going to make something like a tomato sauce when you're adding low acid vegetables or some salsa. So, but your high acid foods like your apples, your sauerkraut, dill pickles, jams and jellies, these all work fine in a boiling water bath canner. So I think this is probably basically what I had just said, but low acid foods require heat treatments of 215 to 240 degrees Fahrenheit to kill heat-resistant spores of pathogenic Clostridium botulinum. In other words, you need to have high heat to kill the spores that the botulism will produce. The botulinum will produce. Okay, so if you're acid or acidified foods, and when I say acidified, that's when you take a low acid food and you add an acid product like vinegar to it, like you take your cucumbers, you add vinegar to make pickles. So acidified foods, these require less severe heat treatments. You can preserve these at temperatures of 180 to 212, and those are the temperatures that you can achieve in a boiling water bath canner. So these temperatures will kill the vegetative cells of spoilage, yeast, and molds, and also bacteria vegetative cells. So when it comes to processing your foods, you want to make sure that you're using an approved processing method. And like I said earlier, there are 3 basic methods: the boiling water bath canner, you can use an atmospheric steam canner, or you can use a pressure canner. So to can foods in a boiling water bath canner, you're going to need about 6 inches of water in the canner. You want to make sure that you have extra water boiling on the side in a separate pan in case you need to add more water once the jars are in the canner. And the temperature of the water in the canner when you add the jars depends on the type of packaging, the pack that you're using for your product. So for hot pack jars, and that's what we're going to do tonight, we have some tomatoes that we're going to use a hot pack. The water should be simmering when the jars are packed in the canner, and simmering water is going to be about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. So for raw pack jars, the water should be hot, but not simmering. And you can actually use a thermometer to check the temperature of the water. With the raw pack, the water should be about 140 degrees Fahrenheit only. And this will help prevent your jars from breaking. So once the jars are on the rack in the canner, you want to place your jars on the rack in the canner so that they do not come in contact with the bottom of the canner. So I'll show you my canner when we get to the food demonstration part, but just remember that you don't want to just put your jars right on the bottom of the canner, because that can cause your jars to crack, and you don't want that to happen. And also it allows, the rack allows the water and the temperature to circulate under the jars and around the jars, and that prevents breakage as well. So if your canner doesn't have a rack, we'll look at what you can do for that. But basically what you can do is you can take the rings. Let me show you, like the rings that you have, the rings that you get to seal your jars. You can put these on the bottom of a large pot and use that to keep your jars from touching the bottom of the canner. But in the past, sorry, I had to sneeze again. In the past, we used to tell people to put a towel, like a kitchen towel, in the bottom of your canner, but we don't or your pot, but we really don't recommend that method anymore. So, but once you have your jars in the canner, the water needs to be 2 inches above the top of the jars. So that's something that's really important, because you want that water to circulate at the bottom of the jar and also at the top of the jar. Okay. So there are some methods that are not recommended. Solar canners, I haven't seen one of those in years and years. Microwaves, you don't want a can in the microwave or the dishwasher. There are lots of different people. I get calls all the time from people that have these really interesting ways that they want to can their food. Sometimes they see things on the internet. Some people will find things from hear stories from relatives or grandmothers and things like that. But we really recommend that you use a research-based canning procedure when you're canning your foods. So no oven canning. I've heard people say, I want to can in my oven. No, you can't do that. So you have to really stick to tried and true methods. And when it comes to using the pressure canner, by pressurizing the water, you can get the temperatures to rise above the boiling point of water. So the temperatures can get over 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you get those higher temperatures, that's what you're going to need to kill the botulism. So we're going to do, like I said, tomatoes tonight. But if I was doing green beans, we'd be using the pressure canner and not the water bath canner, because it will achieve those high temperatures. Okay, so next we're going to talk just a little bit about your seal integrity, because getting a good seal on your jar is really essential to having a safe product. And so it keeps the oxygen out to minimize undesirable chemical reactions and growth of molds and aerobic bacteria. And also the presence of a vacuum normally indicates that the seal is intact. And in this picture, they're using a little gauge that measures the vacuum, the force of the vacuum on this jar. And this is a test kitchen that one of the, I think it's either the Home Center for Food Preservation or one of the like ball canning company. They use these gauges to really see if there's a good vacuum. And they can really just, like I said, the vacuum normally indicates that the seal is really intact. So this is just showing you like some of the science behind the canning process. So to ensure a good seal, that means you need to create a good vacuum. So when we put our product in our jars tonight, in just a few minutes, let me get one of my jars and I'm going to kind of show you. You want to make sure that you have clean, intact jar rims and new lids. So this is the jars you can use over and over and over again, but the lids, the little flat pieces, this little piece can only be used once. So this is a wide mouth jar. This is a regular lid, but you want to make sure that you have clean, intact rims, jar rims. So you want to make sure that you rub your finger over your rim of your jar. If you have any chips or any cracks, you don't want to use that jar. But this jar is fine. Okay. You want to make sure that you have adequate headspace, and that's really important. So whenever you can a product, the instructions will tell you how much headspace you have to have. And really what the headspace is just the distance between the top of the food in your jar and the top of the rim. So our tomatoes tonight have a 1/2 inch headspace, and I'll show you how to measure that headspace. Another thing to do to make sure that you have a good vacuum seal is you want to make sure that you remove any air bubbles in the jar. So we'll go over how to do that when we put our tomatoes in the jar. And we want to pack the food while it's hot. So those are just some of the things that you can do to make sure that you have a good vacuum and a good seal in your jar. Okay. So when it comes to sources of information that we recommend you use to, find just the instructions for canning and preserving your foods. Penn State Extension, we have a Less Preserved series of handouts. We also now have a Less Preserved resource guide that you can purchase from our website. The National Center for Home Food Preservation, it's a great website to use. It's really managed by the University of Georgia, and the University of Georgia also produces the So Easy to Preserve. I know this probably is backwards, but you can find this online as well, and or contact us at the Extension office if you ever need a copy of that. But the So Easy to Preserve and the National Center for Home Food Preservation really work hand in hand. You know, that's where they test the recipes for the USDA. USDA also is a great source. And if you have a product that's from a different part of the country, like maybe chilies, you know, we always recommend another extension service, like maybe New Mexico or Arizona, where those products are more commonplace. But, you know, internet can be a good source if you're using the internet to go to another extension service, the National Center for Home Food Preservation, Penn State Extension again. But the thing that we really want to stress is that once you find that good research-based tested recipe, that you don't make modifications, because we really want you to stick to the procedure that the recipe details. So the directions must be followed exactly. So you don't want to add anything to it or change the composition of how the foods are prepared. So if it says to chop the food into 1-inch dice, you know, dices, you don't want to do that. You don't want to have mashed or anything like that, because that can really affect the safety of your product. So again, directions need to be followed exactly as described. And there's really no way to predict if grandma's recipe used safe procedures for preserving. So see if you can find something that's really close to grandma's recipe, or maybe make modifications after you take it out of the jar. But follow safe recipes. I can't stress that enough. Now,
Hey,
there are some.
Alice, sorry,
Yeah.
I think we have a question. I think
Uh-huh.
Alice has a question she wants to ask. Alice, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. I couldn't wait to the end if you'd rather.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
I'm
why
almost at the end.
okay. Why did you say you can only use the flat piece once? I always
Okay.
use mine.
Okay, so if you look at the flat piece, you see how that red rim around the edge of
Yeah.
it,
Mhm.
that's a compound that once it's activated, it's really designed to be activated to adhere to the jar once. So
Okay.
once you use it and take it through the canning process, then that compound is no longer able to be activated again to use with another jar.
Oh, okay. So you have to buy them continuously?
Yes, you
Oh.
now the rings you can use. Sorry, I'm going to reach over this part. The ring, you can use
Mhm.
this one over and over again.
Mhm.
You have to just make sure that it's not rusted or
Mhm.
dented or anything like that. But the flats, only once.
Oh, wow.
That's
Okay.
a great question. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. So even though you see these foods in the store, like pumpkin pie filling and broccoli, maybe summer squash, um, they cannot be canned at home. So just remember, you can't produce the same process at home as you can in a factory. You just can't get a safe product, especially with things like pumpkin, because you just can't get the center of that jar hot enough consistently to kill the bacteria that can be present. So you don't, and again, like if you're making soup that has noodles or eggs, flour, milk, anything like that, you want to put that in after you take it out of the jar, because it thickens the product, and that way you can't get a safe product. And another thing, like oils, like a lot of people are buying like the herb infused oils, things like that. there's not a safe canning method for those things. So if your herbs, drying them or freezing them probably would be better than trying to make your own oil and herb mixture. Okay, and I think that's going to take us to the end of our presentation, but I do want to, I'm sorry, go over the equipment. So the equipment, the jar lifter, we're going to look at when we do the hands-on part, but we have a jar lifter. We're going to use a funnel. The funnel is made out of plastic. And we talked about freeing your bubbles. So you have a bubble freer. Now the lid wand is not as popular as it used to be because in the past, the lids had to be heated in hot water. And we used that lid wand to have like a little magnet that you could lift the lid up. But because you don't have to heat them in that hot water, that's been eliminated. So you don't really need that lid wand as much. Clean kitchen cloths, and also a timer and hot pads are some of the basic equipment that you need when you're canning. So I wanted to really quickly go over the methods. The hot pack is the preferred method, and you have less floating. It's easier to pack, and that's what we're going to use tonight with our tomatoes. The raw pack is easier, but you don't get as much food in a jar, and you're going to have more floating with the raw pack. So we're going to heat our tomatoes. We've heated those tonight. And I talked about headspace earlier, but just make sure that you use the recommended headspace for your product. Okay. And also when it comes to your jars and lids, you want to make sure that you wash your canning jars. Don't use them if they have a nick or a scratch. And you want to make sure that you keep them hot until you're using them. So I have my canning jars in my boiling water canner, staying nice and warm as we go through the presentation. And you want to make sure that you prepare the 2-piece canning lids and the ring bands as your package instructs you to. It's really important that you remove the air bubbles and you wipe the rims with a clean cloth. And you want to make sure that you adjust the 2-piece lids with tightening them fingertip tight, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Also follow your directions really carefully, and the time that you process your foods really depends on the size of your jar. So if you don't process them long enough, you can get spoilage in your jar. So when it comes to pressure canning, the pressure canning method, we're not going to go through tonight, but it's a lot different than the boiling water bath method. You don't use as much water with the pressure canning. You're going to have 2 to 3 inches of simmering water in a hot canner. You're going to pack hot jars and you're going to put those in the simmering water, or you're going to pack raw jars and put those into hot water. And you have a rack on the bottom of your pressure canner. You want to make sure that you put the lid on the canner and with the weight off and the pet cot open. So with the pressure canner, you're going to have to exhaust the canner for about 10 minutes. That means you have a steady stream of steam escaping for about 10 minutes. And then you basically take your food through the canning method. You close the vent. You count the time when the pressure comes up and it's reached. You have to adjust your canning method times with your altitude where you are, and there's ways that you can easily do that to find out what your altitude is by going online. And when it comes at the end of your pressure canning cycle, you want to turn off the heat, and you have to let that pressure drop to 0 before you can open up the lid. And this just really just takes you through the process of pressure canning. And I'm not going to go through all of this tonight because we are going to use the boiling water canning method tonight. But I am going to offer a pressure canning class in July on the 6th at the Extension office. And Cassidy has the link for that. We can drop that into the chat before we end tonight. But if you're interested in something like that, we will be doing a pressure canning class, at the Extension office. So instead of going through the slides with the boiling water canning method, I thought what we do is really just, I'll do a demonstration to show you basically how to can your foods using the boiling water canning method. And we'll talk about testing your seals as well. And also we'll talk about storing your foods at the end, once you've preserved them. Okay. So do we have any questions before we go over to the stove?
Randall, I have a quick question.
Mhm.
What you said about the herbs and the oil, is
Mhm.
that just if you're gonna like consume it? Do you think it's okay? Like I have like rosemary infused oil that I was planning to use like for like hair and skincare. Do you think that's okay, or would there still be like bacteria growing in that?
I never never thought about that. Um, Now you still could have the possibility of botulism because
Okay.
you put that herb in an oil and it causes an anaerobic environment where
Okay.
botulism could actually grow. So I would be careful with doing that.
Okay,
Maybe
thank you.
as you need to use it, and then do it. But
Okay,
I
that's
wouldn't.
great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good question.
Thank you.
A little out of my wheelhouse, but yeah. Okay. And I think we already mentioned that we have the Let's Preserve series, and you should be getting this basics of home canning, and also there's one that I sent out for you guys on freezing vegetables, and also the basic tomato handout as well. And this is our newest publication, Preserving Food at Home as a Resource Guide, and it basically has all of those Let's Preserve publications. Everyone is included in this one guide with other resource information as well. Okay. And I'm going to stop sharing. I can get to that. And I was going to say we can go ahead and go to the stove. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna stop my video here. Okay. All right, so everybody can see our stove and our tomatoes here. So what we're going to do tonight is we are going to go through the process of canning tomatoes. So I know that tomatoes that you have from your garden are going to be a whole lot better than what I have from the produce market, but I just wanted to show you the basic method for canning tomatoes, because tomatoes, again, it's just a product that a lot of people enjoy canning. I just can basic, just plain tomatoes today. But you can also make tomato sauce. You can make tomato juice. There are lots of different things that you can different products that you can produce with tomatoes. So you see what I'm doing first is I'm just scoring the tomatoes. I'm cutting a little X in the bottom of the tomato. So what we're going to do is first, we're going to have to take the skins off of the tomatoes. So I have a little pot of hot water here in the back. I don't know if you can see that. And we're going to just drop a few of the tomatoes in. Usually I like to have nice boiling water, but I turned it down just a little bit while I was talking. So we're going to drop the tomatoes in, and you let them stay in that hot water for about 30 seconds to a minute. And what happens, you're going to get tomatoes that have skins that have loosened. And if you do that scoring, you'll see that the tomato skins peel off really easily. So we're going to just peel the skins off of the tomatoes, talking too fast here. And we're going to just core it. And I'm going to just kind of do the core. And that pops right out. So already got these tomatoes in the hot water, so they're ready. Their skins are already loosened. Okay, so I'm going to turn this one off in the back. Okay, I'm just kind of cutting the core out. Try not to squish my tomatoes too badly. As you see that this core pops right out. And that one has a little bit of skin left, but remember that, you know, just that little bit of time in that water really makes peeling those tomatoes so much easier. And don't forget to score them. Okay, so once we get the core out, okay, we're going to cut them in half. Move my plastic wrap here. Okay, so I'm going to move those skins. So I have these tomatoes that have been scored and also peeled, and we're going to just cut them in half. Now, some people like to take the seeds out. These tomatoes, or these Romas, the seeds were so small, I'm just not even going to worry about taking the seeds out. They don't really have a lot there. So we've got those peeled and cored, and what we're going to do next, I'm going to clean up this a little bit. We're going to put them into water, and you can see I covered them with water and I cooked them for about 5 minutes. And now we have our nice hot tomatoes, and these are ready to go into the jars. Okay, so let's look at the process of putting them into the jars and getting them ready to go into the canner. I'm gonna wet a paper towel here. So this is our jar lifter, if you can see that. Now these are the handles. This is the upside, this is the handle, and this is the part that we use to lift the jars. So I'm going to get my oven mitt, and I'm going to open up the canner here. Now I have about 3 or 4 jars in this hot canner. Now remember, we're going to use hot jars, and we're going to put hot food into our hot jars. Okay, I'm going to turn off my back eye here. Okay, so with this jar lifter, you see how it makes it easy to get this jar out of the hot water. And what I usually do is I have a cutting board ready to put my jars on. You can use a wooden cutting board. So I take a towel, just a regular tea towel or kitchen towel. I fold it up like this, and I wrap it around the jar. Can you see that? And it kind of works as a handle, so you can manipulate the jar without getting your hands burned on that hot jar. We're going to use a funnel. We talked about the funnel when we looked at equipment. So this is a plastic funnel. Don't use a metal funnel when you do this, because it could chip your jar. So we're going to use a nice plastic funnel. And you can find these things at your local discount department store. I'm not going to name names, but we know what we mean by a discount department store, right? You can find it at a discount department store, or believe it or not, hardware stores are a great place to find your canning equipment. I'm going to move the star over so you can see me putting the tomatoes into the jar. Now, I cut these tomatoes in half. You can make crushed tomatoes. You can make whole tomatoes. You can put them in whole if you want to. I like half tomatoes, so that's what I did. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention. We talked about making sure that your product was acidified. And to do that, you can add lemon juice to your product. So 100% lemon juice. It needs to be commercial lemon juice. Do not use fresh squeezed lemon juice, because you won't have a consistent acidity. So commercially produced lemon juice, a tablespoon per pint is what we're going to use. So we're going to put that in there. If you want to add salt, you can add salt as well. But I don't like salt in my tomatoes, because I like my tomatoes to just have that nice fresh flavor. Now, the salt doesn't really affect the pH. So if you want to use salt, you can. If you don't have to. But if you do use salt, let me move my tomatoes so you can see this. You want to make sure that you're using pickling or canning salt, because table salt, kosher salt will leave your product cloudy because they have an anti-caking ingredient. So we don't want to add that to your jar. Okay, so I'm going to continue to add my tomatoes to the jar. Now, adding that lemon juice or vitamin C, you can just use vitamin C tablets that you've crushed up to your jar, will affect the flavor. So if it's a little bit too acidic for you, what you can do is you can add a little bit of sugar to offset that acidic flavor. Okay, but I like the tomatoes when you bring them out of the jar to use them. I don't really taste that lemon juice or the citric, I'm sorry, or the vitamin C. Okay, so we have our tomatoes in the jar. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start checking the headspace. So this is the little tool that you can use to check the headspace. It has notches that go up, and it starts at 1/4 inch and it goes all the way up to 1 inch. So for the tomatoes, we need a 1/2 inch headspace. So that's this little notch on our tool. So we're going to line that up on the rim of our jar, and we're going to check, and that's exactly 1/2 inch headspace. What we're going to do next is we're going to make sure we don't have any air bubbles in our jar. Now, you can use the other end of this tool. If you don't have this fancy tool, you can just use a plastic knife. Again, plastic, not metal, because we don't want to chip the rim. Okay, so we just have a few more minutes. I'm going to quickly go around the jar and just kind of make sure that we don't have any big bubbles of air sitting at the bottom of the jar, because we want to try to get as much of the air out of this product as possible. So when it goes to seal, we'll get a nice, good seal, no air bubbles popping up and affecting our seal. Okay, we're going to use just a clean paper towel that's dampened to wipe the rim. And then we are going to add the lid, then the ring. And we want to make sure that this is fingertip tight, and we're not going to, tighten it real tight because we want to get that air out. If you make it too tight, you won't be able to do that. So you're going to turn it till you feel that first piece of resistance, give it a little bit of a turn more, and your jar is ready to go back into the canner. So we're going to use our jar lifter to pick our jar up and put it back into the canner. And you see when I put it into the canner, we have just a little bit of water on top of the jar. So what we do next, we're just going to do this one jar. We're going to bring it up to a boil. I'm going to add the lid. And when this comes up to a nice rolling boil, we're going to start the timer for 40 minutes because that's the amount of time that you need to process tomatoes in a pint jar. When the 40 minutes is up, we're going to turn off. We're going to pretend like the 40 minutes is up. We're going to turn off the stove. We're going to open up the canner. We're going to let it sit for 5 minutes. This is really important that you let it sit for 5 minutes to kind of adjust. And then we're going to take our jar lifter. We're going to bring the jars straight up. Now, it's going to have a little bit of water on the top. Don't be tempted to tilt it. You're just going to bring it over, and you're going to sit it on I'll sit it on the cutting board here, but you can sit it on a towel, or you can sit it on like a rack, like a baking rack, so that you don't put it right on like if you have a granite countertop. That's going to be too much of a temperature difference. You may get a cracked jar. So you're going to let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. And after that, you should hear like a little popping sound in your jar lid. That's an indication that your lid has sealed. Now, I canned some tomatoes earlier. So these are the tomatoes that I canned earlier. Now, with the hot pack, you don't have as many floating tomatoes. So, but if you use a raw pack, you get a safe product, but you may have a little bit of separation between the tomatoes and the juice. Okay, so that basically takes us through the canning process for tomatoes. This process is a little bit different for other products like produce, like with apples and things like that. But that's basically what you would do for canning. Okay. So we are just about close to the end of time. So I wanted to see if we had any questions, if that made sense.
You may have answered this already. How long will that last?
How long will the product last in the jar?
Yeah,
We recommend that you can what you can use within a year.
okay,
Yeah, that's for safety reasons. We tell you, and quality reasons, really, because once you get it in a jar, it will last for a long time, but a year is what we really recommend.
okay.
After
wonderful.
that, the product will start to deteriorate, discolor, and it
Mhm.
just won't be as good.
Thank you.
Great question.
And quick question, Mendel.
Mhm.
I always thought that more acid foods are naturally preserve themselves more naturally just because of the acid content. I just want to make sure I'm not disillusioned by that. I mean, like I find tomatoes, sauce, and all that stuff lasts longer, and and like stuff that has a lot of citric, anything that like has a high acid content seems to last longer. Is that true? Is that
For every product, we still have that basic 1 year recommendation for storing them. And now with the tomatoes, you saw that I added acid to them because they're a
right?
borderline
Right,
food.
right, right,
They're a little bit on that border with the acidity. But apples, jams, apples or peaches, you wouldn't have to add.
right, right, because they have an high acid content. I see.
Mhm. Yeah, but
Okay.
you could add vitamin C tablets, vitamin C mixture, water mixture to your apples, and that prevents them from browning.
The actual tablets like you take for vitamin C? Oh,
Yeah, I'm going to show you. Sorry, I'm going to reach over here,
that's okay.
but I keep my my vitamin
Oh,
C tablets,
oh, okay. Just
and
throw
you
one of
just
them in
use
there. Yeah.
well, actually, what you do, you have to get a mortar and pestle,
Right, and
and
break
you
them down.
crush it. Yeah, crush it
Right.
into a powder.
Hmm.
These inexpensive vitamin C tablets, you can buy the Fruit Fresh or whatever. And I'm not dropping names here, but I'm just saying that you can buy the commercially produced product, or you could
Right.
just buy some vitamin C tablets and crush them up yourself.
Oh, that's great. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Okay.
And I just have one, it might be a silly question,
No,
but
no question is silly.
and I should know this because I'm like Serve Safe certified or whatever, but
Mhm.
so say I have, I canned tomatoes, they've been in the pantry for 6 months, I open them up. Do I have to refrigerate them now since I've broken the seal? Do I have to eat it right? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can
Okay.
just put them in the fridge, just like you would when you open up a can from the grocery store.
Okay. That makes sense
Mhm.
then. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Good
Mm.
question.
Any other questions for Mandel? All right. I don't think we have any more